My Stoic practice based on Epictetus' three disciplines. You don't suffer simply because of what happens to you. Suffer because of the way your mind judges what happens. Someone insults you. That is an event. But then the mind says, he isn't allowed to treat me like that. Then he has to respect me. And finally, I have to get even. The event happens once, but your judgment can make it live again 100 times in your mind. This is where Stoic philosophy begins, not by controlling the world, not by making everything go your way, and not with a promise that if you control your mind well enough, the universe will hand you whatever you want. Stoicism is harder than that. It asks, if life doesn't go your way, can you still reason clearly and act rightly? That is the real test. Epictetus built the practice of philosophy around three disciplines: the discipline of desire, the discipline of action, and the discipline of assent, how we handle impressions in the mind before giving them our agreement. These three areas are not separate. An impression appears. You pay attention to it. You decide whether to assent to the judgment it carries. From that desire or aversion forms, then you act. And finally, you face the outcome. So Stoicism isn't simply about suppressing emotions. The deeper goal is to live according to virtue, wisdom, courage, justice, and temperance. A person can be completely calm and yet utterly unjust, highly disciplined, yet lacking wisdom, able to endure pain, yet still act wrongly. So the question isn't just, can I control myself? But rather, what kind of person am I becoming through that self-control? In this lesson, we will go through 10 Stoic practices structured around Epictetus' three disciplines. Not 10 ancient original rules, but 10 practical applications translated for modern life. Part 1. The discipline of desire. Desire is not the enemy. The problem is what you are desiring and how much power you are handing over to it. Practice 1. Painted but not dependent. Imagine you have a goal. You want a better job, more money, better health, to be loved, to be respected. There is nothing wrong with those desires. Stoicism does not ask you to become a person without goals. What matters is distinguishing between what you prefer and what defines your worth. In Stoic thought, things like health, wealth, reputation, or success are not placed on the same level as virtue. A rich person is not automatically a good person. A poor person is not automatically a bad person. A famous person does not automatically possess higher character than someone unknown. External things can be preferred choices, but they are not the ultimate foundation of moral character. You can say, I want to succeed, but you don't need to say, if I don't succeed, I am a failure. You can say, I want to be loved, but you don't need to say, if this person leaves me, my life loses its value. You can say, I want to win, but still mentally prepare for the possibility of failure. Because wanting something does not mean becoming dependent on it. Pursue what you believe is worthwhile, but don't make them a prerequisite for your peace of mind. Practice 2. Practice living without relying on comforts. There is a paradox. The more you fear losing something, the easier it is to become its slave. Afraid of losing money, you cling to a job you hate. Afraid of rejection, you stay in a relationship that isn't right for you. Afraid of losing status, you live for the approval of others. Afraid of losing comfort, you start viewing every mild inconvenience as a disaster. Seneca once described intentionally practicing simple living conditions as a way to test fear and dependency on comfort. The goal is not self-torment, nor is it to prove that suffering is good. The goal is to ask a single question: if this were gone, could I still live rightly? Occasionally eat a simple meal, cut back on shopping, put down your phone, spend time without familiar comforts, or voluntarily take on an inconvenient task you normally avoid. Not to hate comfort, but to recognize that comfort is a tool you use, not something that owns you. Money can be useful. Shelter can offer security. Technology can make life easier. But if you cannot live without them, The issue is no longer comfort. It is dependency. Freedom isn't necessarily having everything. Sometimes freedom is knowing you can still live rightly even when things are taken away. Practice 3. Sip what is not in your power. There are things you can influence, and there are things that ultimately lie outside your control. You can prepare for an interview, but you can't order the employer to hire you. You can take care of your body, but you cannot make it invincible. You can treat someone with kindness, but you cannot force them to reciprocate the way you want. You can do your absolute best, but you cannot guarantee the outcome. This is where acceptance becomes crucial. Acceptance does not mean liking what happened. It does not mean saying, everything is great. It does not mean, I am not allowed to feel sad. And it certainly does not mean, I don't need to take action. Acceptance begins with a simple truth. This is what happened. Only comes the question. Now what part of this is still up to me? The phrase amor fati, or love of fate, is often brought up in modern Stoic discussions, but it is more strongly tied to Nietzsche than it was a central concept in ancient Stoicism. What is valuable here is the attitude. Don't waste all your energy denying reality. If a door has closed, look at what you can still do. If a plan fails, see what you can learn. If something cannot be changed, don't base your entire peace of mind on the requirement that it must change. Remember, acceptance is not surrender. Accepting reality is not surrendering to reality. Part 2. The discipline of action. After learning to discipline desire, the next question is, how should I live and act? This is where virtue takes center stage. Practice 4. Live according to virtue. You can achieve a great deal, but if you don't pay attention to who you are becoming, success might only turn you into a more powerful version of your old flaws. Stoicism places virtue at the center. The 4 cardinal virtues often highlight are wisdom, knowing what is worth doing; courage, doing the right thing even when it is hard; justice, dealing fairly with others; and temperance, not letting desire and impulse rule over you. Consider the difference. A person who controls their anger but treats others unjustly is not a complete Stoic ideal. Someone highly disciplined yet lacking wisdom may just be becoming an efficient machine. Someone courageous without justice might use their strength to inflict harm. So don't just ask, am I achieving my goals? Ask, is the way I achieve them making me a better human being? That is a tougher question, but is also far more important. You aren't just building a life. You are building the person who will live it. Practice 5. Accede where your power. The mind tends to make 2 classic mistakes. First, worry about what hasn't happened yet. Second, obsessing over what has already occurred. The past is no longer a place where you can act. The future is not yet a place where you can act. But the present is where your choices live. You can learn right now. You can apologize right now. You can prepare right now. You can tell the truth right now. You can break a bad habit right now. So instead of asking, what will become of my life? Ask, what is my next right action? This doesn't mean rushing through life. Quite the opposite. It anchors your mind back to where its actual agency resides. You don't have to solve your entire life today. You only need to do the task directly in front of you well. One right choice, then another, then another. That is how a life is built. Practice 6. Turn obstacles into training grounds. You will face obstacles, not because you did something wrong, but because obstacles are simply part of life. You will be rejected. You will fail. You will meet people who disappoint you. You will lose things you thought you would keep forever. Stoicism does not say, everything that happens is a gift. A loss can still hurt. A failure is still a failure. An injustice is still an injustice. What Stoicism asks is, now that this has happened, how can I use it to practice virtue? Failure can test your courage. Loss can test your capacity for acceptance. Conflict can test your sense of justice. Temptation can test your temperance. And hardship can reveal weaknesses that comfort kept hidden. Obstacles aren't inherently good, but the way you confront them can become your training ground. So next time a problem arises, instead of asking, "Why is this happening to me?" add another question. What virtue does this situation give me a chance to practice? Part 3. The discipline of impressions and judgment. This is the most subtle part, because long before you act, your mind has already interpreted the world. An event occurs, a fantasia appears. Then you can either assent to the judgment that impression carries, or you can pause. This is where Stoic practice becomes remarkably practical. Practice 7. Distinguish what is up to you. Epictetus opens with a sharp distinction. Some things are up to us, and some things are not entirely up to us. But beware of the overly simplistic interpretation. I control everything inside and control nothing outside. Reality is more nuanced. You can control your effort in an interview, but the outcome still depends on the hiring manager. You control how you speak, but you can't control how others interpret your words. You control your preparation, but you can't guarantee victory. Therefore, distinguish what is strictly up to your decision from what you can influence, but cannot guarantee. This frees you from two extremes: helplessness and the obsession with control. You still act with full effort, but you don't demand that the world hand over the exact result you wanted. Practice 8. Prosauch. Prosauch can be understood simply as conscious mindfulness toward your own life. It isn't just stay calm. It is pay attention. Pay attention to what your mind is doing. Pay attention to the judgments you are making. Pay attention to what desires are surfacing. Pay attention to what fears are taking the wheel. Imagine receiving a text, "We need to talk." Instantly, your mind starts spinning scenarios. What is wrong? Joe, they hate me. Am I about to lose something? Prosauch asks you to recognize, my mind is creating a narrative. You don't have to believe it instantly. You don't have to deny it. Just observe. It is a tiny step, but it creates space between impression and judgment. Practice 9. Withhold assent. Just because an impression appears doesn't mean you have to agree with it. This is one of the single most crucial practices. Take a simple example. Someone doesn't reply to your text. The event. They haven't replied. Then the mind says, "They disrespect me." That is a judgment. Then I need to show them. That is a choice taking shape. The pause lies right in the middle. Impression, observation, examination, assent or refusal. Action. Not every thought that pops into your head is trustworthy. Not every feeling is evidence. Not every story your mind tells is true. When a powerful impression strikes, ask, do I know this for sure, or am I assuming? Is this the objective fact, or is this my judgment of the fact? If I don't react right now, what changes? That pause is where self-mastery begins. Practice 10. Separate impressions from judgment. Take another example. You get an email. We have decided to go with another candidate. The event. You were not selected. But the mind adds, I am not good enough. Then I will never succeed. Then everything is pointlessness. Now strip them apart. Event. I was not picked for this job. Judgment. I am a failure. Those two things are not the same. And the gap between them is precisely where Stoic practice proves its power. You don't need to fool yourself with toxic positivity. It is fine, I will definitely win next time. You don't know that. Instead, state what is precise. I was not chosen this time. Next. What can I learn? What can I improve? What is the next right move? This isn't about suppressing emotion. You can still feel sad. You can still feel disappointed. But you don't have to turn disappointment into a verdict on your entire human worth. This is also where apatheia must be properly understood. Apatheia does not mean feeling nothing at all. It is closer to freedom from unhealthy, destructive passions tied to false judgments. A Stoic doesn't need to turn into a stone. They need to become a person who can catch impressions test judgments, and choose responses aligned with reason and virtue. The three disciplines united. Now, look back at the whole system. You have the discipline of desire, learning not to make external outcomes the condition of your intrinsic worth. The discipline of action, learning to act with virtue within your sphere of power. The discipline of assent, learning not to blindly agree with every judgment that pops into your mind. These three link together in a chain: impression, attention, judgment, desire or aversion, choice, action, outcome. And when the outcome arrives, you return once again to the question, what is still within my control? If there is action to take, act. If it cannot be changed, accept it. Then the cycle begins anew. That is not a formula to control life. It is a method to live better no matter what life throws your way. Practitioner Manavifo. Over the next Jaime-born hours, when someone angers you, don't immediately assent to your first judgment. Observe it. When something doesn't go as planned, separate the outcome from yourself. Worth. When you want something intensely, ask whether you merely prefer it or are dependent on it. When facing hardship, ask what virtue you can practice. When anxious about the future, return to the very next action within your power. When something is outside your control, stop demanding reality, change before you allow yours to live. And when an impression strikes, remember, you are not required to believe the first thing your mind tells you. Pause. Observe. Examine. Then assent. Then act. Stoicism does not promise a life without suffering. It doesn't promise you will always win. It doesn't promise others will treat you fairly. It doesn't promise every plan will succeed. And it doesn't demand that you become an emotionless robot. It makes a more modest proposal, but a far more powerful one. Learn to use your mind better. When impression appears, pay attention. When a judgment forms, test it. When a desire rises, ask if it is truly worth depending on. When it is time to act, act with virtue. When the outcome arrives, distinguish what remains in your hands. And when something cannot be changed, accept reality without surrendering your power to act. You don't control the world. You don't need to. You only need to master how you perceive, desire, choose, and act. Because between what happened to you and your next action, there is a gap. In that gap lies prososhe, attention, assent, agreement, judgment, evaluation, and, ultimately, choice, action. That is where Stoic practice begins, not by controlling fate, but by refusing to let external things decide who you will become. Reason clearly, desire rightly, act virtuously, and when life strays from your plans, stand firm.